You don't even need to like Star Wars to like Andor. Hey nerds, what's up? It's no secret that Andor Season 1 blew me away. Its excellent use of time, its subtle and nuanced character work, and deeply impactful emotional beats made for an incredible season of TV. But after Season 2 was just as excellent, I knew it would now be my job to convince absolutely everybody to watch Andor. Whether you haven't liked anything that Disney has put out for Star Wars, whether you haven't even seen Star Wars, or if you saw Star Wars and didn't like it, I am here to convince you that Andor is for all of you and you are gonna like it. Andor isn't good Star Wars TV. Andor is excellent SFF TV, period. And so today we're gonna dig into what makes Andor so good. You may have heard that Andor is Star Wars, but it's gritty. It's finally adult now. And okay. I usually take issue that Star Wars is only for children just because it is child friendly. And I also take issue with the idea that something has to be gritty, quote unquote, to be considered adult. As somehow being gritty makes it better TV, and as if media that is enjoyed by children can never be deep or nuanced or have good character development. I just don't agree. That said, Andor is for adults. And I do think it is the most adult thing Star Wars has ever produced. But it's not for the reasons you might think. In my opinion, it's adult for the right reasons. So often, media, whether TV, movies, or books, is labeled adult because of its use of graphic violence, sex, or language. And to my chagrin, this seems to be the only thing today that makes a work labeled as adult. Want to make it adult? Just make sure you put something graphic in it, and that's it. And I'm not trying to say that having graphic elements like that in your show makes it bad, but I do think it's just the cheapest and laziest way to make something adult. Adult media should mean more than just that. Things that are often overlooked when you're making media for adults is that adults should have a higher propensity for complexity in both themes and thought and plot. They've lived longer and have seen more things, and so hopefully have a bigger knowledge of nuanced things and understand and recognize nuance. Because they have a greater life experience, they might have a greater breadth to draw from when they are relating to different characters. As adults, we may understand more gray situations and we have come more face to face with this, and we may be facing more complex questions than we faced as children, dealing with life and politics and jobs and etc. And while not everybody is this lucky, in general terms, children have simpler lives and are often more prone to black and white thinking, having simpler worries, and seeing the world through a narrower lens. Yes, Andor is more violent than most of the other Star Wars I've seen, but it's still a show that deals with just blasters and so is pretty bloodless. And so in that way, Andor isn't necessarily more graphic in violence. I feel like it feels so much more violent because it deals differently with the thematic elements of violence. Shot for shot, scene for scene, Andor maybe has some more violence, but it certainly doesn't have more blood. It's more how it frames that violence and the deep connection with which it gives its viewers to that violence that I think makes it a more adult use of violence, rather than just including graphic scenes. In fact, some of the scenes that might be considered the most graphic in the show, particularly in season 2, they are implied completely off screen. It's the thematic element that feels violent more than just the view of it itself. And yes, Andor explores the deep complexities of being a hero. The characters are not all good or bad, the shiny heroes we often see. But in a world where gray characters and the term anti-hero are thrown around liberally, I appreciate how grounded all of the Andor characters are. They feel adult because they are dealing with deeply human emotions, that of wanting to do what's right, but when facing the reality of what that means, they sometimes fail. Yes, it's more adult because we aren't seeing the black and white of good and evil, but it is done so in a way that doesn't feel like it's somehow reveling in its grittiness or feel like it's doing something by trying to be edgy. It's just presenting characters honestly as they are. And finally, one of my absolutely favorite things about Andor is that it absolutely does not hold your hand. This is not a show that is made for second screen usage or casual chatting during it. It will often just tell you or show you something once and expect you to understand and remember it and really engage with the show on trying to figure out what is happening and the secret plans on top of it and what characters' motivations are. I love a TV show that makes you think, but also is not telling you how to think. It presents situations, and it's one of those shows where I feel like I could discuss it endlessly with somebody because different people would interpret different scenes in totally different ways. Which brings me into my next point, in that Andor is just plain good writing. As a reader, I am usually drawn to character-focused stories, and Andor is a completely character-driven show. And the best part is not only that it's character-driven, but it is the way that it is character-driven, in that they show you the things about their characters instead of telling you. They show us in every detail of these characters, how they dress, how they interact with others, the decisions they make, the silent, quiet moments between characters are all telling us individual stories. The craziest thing about Andor to me is if you do watch it after having seen other Star Wars, particularly the original trilogy or Rogue One, you will know very specifically which characters live and which characters have to die or disappear. And despite that, this show still has so much tension. In fact, I was particularly marveling about a specific scene in season 2 where two characters are making a daring escape, except that I'm 100% positive these two characters survive because they're in movies in the future. And yet, my heart was racing. And I realize it's because I'm finally watching a show where the writers understand how to create character tension. They recognize that it doesn't always have to be the what, it can also be the how. This has actually been a big complaint for me and some of the other Star Wars Disney shows that have used characters that we know the outcome of, is that the show kept trying to make me feel tension over someone's life when I knew that character couldn't die, as if life or death is the only way to make someone care or worry about a character. When good writing makes you care deeply for a character, the how something is accomplished is just as important as the if it is accomplished. The how they survive becomes just as important as if they survive, creating that tension. And this is seen time and time again in the show and in very different ways, and it always kept me guessing even when it felt like I should know the outcome. Another thing I love about the writing of the show is how they decided to use mini arcs. So each season of the show is 12 episodes, but within those 12 episodes, there are clusters of 3 to 4 episodes that contain a full story within the larger story. And I think this was brilliant because one thing that I think a lot of fantasy and sci-fi shows struggle with is when you have an episodic format, you feel the need to have an episode be somewhat self-contained in a larger season of a story, which is a lot of work, and I think it's very difficult. So by Andor expanding that to really having kind of sets of 3 be a complete story arc, it gave them more room to maneuver, and I think ends up being an incredibly successful way to keep excitement and tension and movement and pace up in a show that is a little slower because it focuses so much on characters. And I've said it in my other Andor videos I've made, but I'm going to say it again. This show does not waste time. Every scene they have is telling me something new about a character, about a situation, about a culture, about an environment, about a motivation. And it is something I have struggled with a lot recently in some fantasy TV I've watched where they tell me the same things over and over again. Andor may be a show that takes its time with its characters, but it's always making sure to not waste your time, and there is a huge difference. Also, just as an aside, if you're coming here as a huge Star Wars fan, but you haven't given Andor a chance, and especially if you're a fan of like extended universe novels, Mon Mothma is the GOAT in this TV show. Her acting, her writing, her entire storyline is literally excellent. So if that, gives you another reason to try it out. One of the complaints I've had about newer iterations of Star Wars, particularly in terms of the sequels and shows like Obi-Wan, is they seem to have very little understanding of what made Star Wars interesting and successful in the first place. Instead, they rely on cheap copies and tired plot lines without having anything really new to say or add to the conversation. Star Wars is quite a large universe now. I know we have kind of what we consider the core Star Wars, which is like the original movies and probably the prequels, but so many video games, novels, like a whole extended universe novels have been created around Star Wars. It is a vast and giant universe as a property. And so when new iterations keep focusing on the exact same characters and the exact same storylines, it's just kind of like, why? We have other things we could explore. And while some of the show ideas do seem interesting, like there is a story to tell there even among characters we know, it always feels like they take the least interesting track with it. Andor is nuanced, yes. Andor has great characters, yes. Andor is probably the most adult Star Wars thing that has come out. But it never forgets the thematic elements of its source material. This is essential to me in it feeling like Star Wars. No matter how relatable some of our Empire characters feel, no matter how many bad decisions our rebels make, the core of the show is still good versus evil. They humanize the stories. They humanize the resistance. The people who started and upheld the rebellion aren't always perfect and blameless and shiny heroes. But at the end of the day, they were fighting against tyranny. They were making sacrifices for freedom. It explores the complexities without forgetting the core feelings of the story. It isn't embarrassed of the original Star Wars. It doesn't try to rewrite themes or the rebellion to be edgy. It simply makes an interesting and nuanced story out of what was already there. And wrapped up in that classic good and evil theme are a lot of other themes that the original Star Wars has, like redemption, that it's never too late to make the right decision, like hope, that even in the darkest moments, a sacrifice can make a brighter future, like friendship, that relationships we forge can mean something. So why did the Luke Skywalker morally gray change work in the sequels if I'm giving such praise to the nuance that Andor brings? Sure, perhaps it's because we already just had preconceived notions of who Luke is and nobody wants to see their heroes change like that. But to me, there's more at play. What was this change in Luke trying to say within the Star Wars universe or his character? In the end, it just betrays everything that Luke Skywalker was in the original trilogy, and I think that's the problem. If one of the primary thematic elements of the OG Star Wars is redemption, with Luke playing a major role in that theme, then turning back completely on that theme with how he treats Kylo Ren is where a sense of betrayal comes in. Yes, on the surface, it may seem like it's just because we don't want to see our favorites and our heroic characters change in undesirable ways. But I'm convinced that the bigger thing is underneath it. It's that when Star Wars no longer makes you feel like Star Wars, when it starts turning its back on some major thematic elements that made the original so interesting and emotional in the first place. Andor, on the other hand, is able to make morally complex and gray characters while completely maintaining the underlying themes of Star Wars, meaning that when I watch it, I feel more like I am watching Star Wars than when I'm watching literal Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy. Because Star Wars isn't just an amalgamation of specific characters, it's a world and universe that also comes with specific ideas and thematic elements that make it last and sit with us the way it did. Before we wrap up, I do have to mention one other thing I really love about Andor, and that's its setting and overall vibe. As a darker show, focusing supposedly like on the gritty side of things, I think it would be really easy to have a very specific tone and flavor consistently throughout the show. So I was very impressed with all of the different settings and how rich they felt culturally and through costuming, and that they felt like fully realized places that were different than just the common scenes we usually see in Star Wars. And I feel like sometimes in some of the recent Star Wars shows and media, the new planets feel like just a very surface level thing where it's just a single element that is supposed to distinguish it, rather than feeling like it is an alien world with its own habitat and cultures and ideologies. Whereas the few places we visit in Andor instead give me that more depth rather than just a breadth, and I really appreciate it. One criticism of Andor is its lack of use of non-human main characters. And this, I do have to say, is definitely a thing. If you think to the George Lucas Star Wars, they are filled with non-human main characters, or at least high focus characters, and that really gives Star Wars an alien feel. That is missing in Andor. However, my guess is that they did that not as necessarily a cost-saving measure, because I think the show cost a lot, perhaps to kind of like try to wrap in more skeptical people into the Star Wars universe, or for another reason that I don't know. But I will say I love how rich and deep their settings feel, and in many ways that helps lessen the loss from a lack of alien primary characters. So this is when I make my last final pitch to you, depending on who you are. So I have a few pitches for different people. Let's start with you. You, my Star Wars fan, who has just been increasingly embittered by some of the things Disney has put out in the Star Wars universe. Give Andor a chance. It does not have the same problems as other Disney Star Wars. Tony Gilroy clearly had an artistic vision for the show that he gets to actually just execute, and I feel so strongly that that is a through line you can sense in this show, that it was someone who actually had a deep idea and wasn't just trying to like, oh, what about a show about this character? Because that would be good. It's a fantastic story. It feels like Star Wars without retreading the same steps, and it doesn't rely on cheap nostalgia or like name recognition to make a good cohesive story. Also, still try it if you didn't like Rogue One. Now, in fairness, I liked Rogue One. I thought it was a good movie. Andor is leagues better than Rogue One, and I liked Rogue One. So I'm not saying that like as a Rogue One hater, but it just try it. Just try it. Andor is my favorite visual Star Wars thing since the OG trilogy. And I'm a prequel apologist, okay? I'm a prequel apologist. Andor is my favorite thing since the OG trilogy. Okay, next. You're a person who has seen something Star Wars. Maybe you've seen one of the episodes, maybe you've seen a TV show, and you didn't like it. You bounced off of it. If you are still a person who tends to like other fantasy or sci-fi shows, give Andor a chance, okay? You can tell me in the comments why you bounced off it, and I can give you a more personalized recommendation for why Andor matters. But while Andor uses the framework and the characters and the general world rules of Star Wars, it is very different than anything else Star Wars has put out. And once again, just a really solid SFF show outside of Star Wars. Because it does not rely on the typical like nostalgia or rely on the typical characters, I think there's a very good chance that even if you don't like other Star Wars, you could like Andor. And finally, I'm going to talk to you, my people who are somehow watching this video and they've never, ever seen a stitch of Star Wars, which like, surprising, wild to me, but you haven't seen it. You didn't think it was gonna go, think it wasn't for you. Can you watch Andor without having seen anything else Star Wars? This is a question I've gotten. The answer is yes. I don't think you need any of the other stuff. I think it gives you all the context you need in Andor to understand what's going on. I do think it would be somewhat helpful if you have general pop culture knowledge of Star Wars, like there's an evil empire and a rebellion. You probably have heard the word Death Star. That would probably be helpful, but I honestly don't think you actually need it. I think it's all self-contained in the show. What I would say though, if you do watch Andor and love it, because obviously you're gonna love it, consider Rogue One to be the 13th episode of season 2. I don't think you're going to feel like satisfied and that things have conclusion unless you treat the movie Rogue One as kind of like the last episode of the series. So Andor is some of my favorite TV I've ever watched. Ever. I love it. And other than Netflix's One Piece, I think it's my favorite like fantasy adjacent adaptation kind of show in like years and years. It is just so good. It's so rewatchable. Just, can I hype it up anymore? Give it a chance, okay? If you're here as already a fan of Andor, or I've convinced you to watch Andor, I do have a couple other Andor videos you could watch if you want more specifics. I have particularly 2 videos. One I made after just the first 4 episodes of season 1, where I compare it to Rings of Power, which I was watching them concurrently because I came to Andor a little late. Because if you're new here, I wasn't going to watch Andor because I hated Obi-Wan that much. Like, I thought I would never watch a Star Wars thing again. Long story, you can read somewhere else why I ended up giving it a chance. So I compare those two and why I think Andor is so much more successful. And then I do a season 1 kind of wrap up about why Andor is so good. The first one I'm pretty sure doesn't have any spoilers. The second video might. I would have a spoiler warning at the beginning, so I think I try to keep it pretty spoiler free. So you could watch those if that was too long of an explanation. I might also do a spoiler video on season 2 because I feel like I have a lot of thoughts and emotions and feelings. I cried several times watching season 2. So yeah, it was just really great. If you're an Andor lover, please tell me below what you love about Andor and why it's so good. If I convinced you to try Andor when you previously weren't going to, please let me know and then come back and report on how you felt about it. As always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That's the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.